Hey, this is Dr. Hope. It's your boy, Dr. Hope. The trauma doctor is in the house once again. And I'm back. And I'm back with our brand new show called Unbreakable Show with Dr. Hope. The Unbreakable Show with Dr. Hope. Listen, it's Dr. Hope, and I'm a board certified integrative medicine provider. I'm a traumatologist. I'm a brain health specialist. And let me tell you, I'm excited to bring this podcast to you, to your home, to your community, to America. And my concern is based on my research and based on the data that I'm seeing today. We are, or we should be alarmed and concerned about our society, our community, our families, and yes, I would say America at whole. I believe as a traumatologist, as the trauma doctor, based on research that I'm seeing with the World Health Organization and with the CDC, plus many other researchers, is that trauma is the new public health emergency in America. You heard me. I'm going to say it again. Trauma is the new public health emergency in America. And there's a reason why I believe that. When I look at the conditions that I see in the education system, when I look at the conditions that is impacting public safety, when I'm looking at the conditions that is impacting incarceration, and when I'm looking at conditions that is impacting homelessness and poverty and the opioids and the fentanyl problem we have in substance abuse and addictions and addictive behaviors and abandonment and all kind of different maladaptive conditions that we are seeing in America, my friends, let me tell you the truth. We are in a public health crisis. We are in serious trouble. The traumas that we are seeing is mind-boggling. Traumas that we are seeing is just over the top. And so as the trauma doctor, I want to prepare America, prepare my communities, and prepare the nation that we have to go into an entire comprehensive and robust direction. What do you mean by that? Well, I'm glad you asked me, and I'm going to tell you for free. Listen, let me tell you, is that trauma is a real public health emergency. And as we look at a public health emergency, that can be based on terrorism, that can be based on a pandemic, that can be based on an epidemic, that can be based on natural disasters, right? That has created such an emergency in our communities. Well, trauma is the same thing, but a little different. I like to look at it from a trauma doctor's perspective, is that trauma is like a bacteria that has plagued our nation and plagued our communities and plagued our organizations and plagued our families for far long and far too many times. And what we have done is to deal with that bacteria. We have given it a Tylenol and we have given it a Motrin, and we have temporarily masked the symptoms with programs and projects, but we have never vaccinated that bacteria or addressed it or treated it with an antibiotic. And so therefore that trauma bacteria is permeating through America, is permeating through the communities, and we see it all over our communities. Let me be even more frank. When we look at the conditions that we are seeing, when it comes to poverty, for the most part, is going back to many of the root causes of trauma. When we look at homelessness, how many of you guys have looking all over the nation in your communities? It almost doesn't matter what state you live in. Homelessness is not prejudice. Homelessness is not racist. Homelessness does not care about your socio-economical conditions, right? And it's everywhere. We're seeing homeless tents all over our country, all over cities and counties, even in urban and rural areas. Homelessness is a real thing. And one of the root causes and common denominators of homelessness is, guess what? Trauma. Many people who are homeless have experienced many layers of different types of trauma. Violence, when we look at violence all over our nation, I bet you said, boy, if we can just hire 1,000 more police officers on the street, we would get crime and violence under control. That hasn't worked in the last 30 years. We have put Band-Aids on it. We have had some success of public safety to where crime has reduced here or there, but we have never significantly got in control of our crime problem. You know why? Because many of the criminal issues and the public safety issues we have in our communities and we have in our nation is going back to trauma. I wrote a book called Trauma is a New Public Health Emergency in Education. Right now, coming out of COVID, our education system is in trouble. Is in trouble. My friends, let me tell you, when we look at the way kids are not learning, our attendance all over the nation is extremely low. When we look at the academics of kids not learning like they should, and they can't emotionally regulate their behavior, so they're getting suspended and they're going to juvenile detention centers and all of that. Did you not know a lot of that is related to trauma? I say in the education system, if we don't address how kids feel, we will never impact how they learn. Many of that, my friends, come from a lot of trauma. I can go on and on talking about incarceration, how we incarcerate too many people in America today. Matter of fact, the United States incarcerate more people in this country than any country in the world. And then when we look at poor communities and communities of color and black and brown communities, the numbers are concerning and staggering. I did a research years ago called the traumatization of incarceration. Do prison impact the brain of inmates? Does it impact psychiatric disorders and mental illness? Do they come out of prison with anxiety and depression and schizophrenia and PTSD? And the answer is yes. Even in the incarceration system, which I find is really interesting, they call it the DOC, which means the Department of Corrections. The question is, systems for a long time have been false advertising. They've been saying they are the Department of Corrections, but really they're the Department of Punishment. They have specialized in treating humans like animals and treating them and dehumanizing them and demonizing them and wondering how they have created monsters instead of rehabilitation in prison. This all comes from high levels of trauma. So my friends, when we look at today's society and look at the data, when we see that 1 out of 5 Americans have a diagnosable disorder, when we see in America that 70%, let me say that again, 70%, let me say it for the third time, 70% of Americans have experienced at least one traumatic experience in their life. When we look at over 61% of Americans have experienced at least one early childhood experience in their life, my friends, we are really dealing with a public health emergency. Now, just because CNN is not talking about it, just because ABC is not talking about it, just because CBS and NBC is not talking about it, does not mean we are in a public health emergency. It is time for us to cry out, speak truth to power, and galvanize and polarize our communities and our nation, that it's time for us to do something about it. So let's go a little bit deeper when we talk about this thing called trauma. And we explain why it's a public health emergency. Trauma, according to the American Psychological Association, they define trauma as a mental and an emotional wound or injury to the brain that can be based on physical, mental, emotional, or sexual. How Dr. Holt defined it is that when life-devastating things or life-threatening things has happened to somebody, it not only impacts the brain, but it rewires the brain to where the individual who have experienced certain levels of trauma is not the same person that they used to be. because of those injuries and because of those wounds. Well, guess what? You don't have to have a PhD or MD degree to realize that if you have an injury and you don't treat it, what happens? It turns into an infection. And this is the reason why we see it impact mental health and impact behavior health. It impacts depression, anxiety, and mood disorders and psychiatric disorders when we don't identify those wounds and injuries and we help people with their traumas. It impacts the brain. It impacts the different regions of the brain. It impacts your amygdala. It impacts your hippocampus. It impacts your frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex, where the brain no longer or have a difficult time processing information or making choices and decisions that is processed through the cortex of the brain. It impacts your HPA. That releases cortisol in the body that puts you in fight or flight or freeze. This is how it impacts us in society. But this is the thing I want you to take away from today, is that when you are aroused through trauma and you feel danger, there's something called the autonomic nervous system. And in that ANS, there's something called the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is when you feel trauma, you feel danger, it arouses the body because it doesn't feel safe. And this is where the frontal lobe is kind of like hijacked and the survivor part of the brain takes control. And when the survivor brain takes control with a heightened, hyper-aroused sympathetic nervous system, it is hard to talk to that person. It is hard to instruct that person. It is hard to give them resources. It is hard to help them when they are in danger because they sense danger and they cannot process many of the things that we're trying to help them with. It's when we began to bring calming to where individuals can now process because the frontal lobe in the prefrontal cortex comes back online and the brain is back in control and you have the activation of cognition and executive functioning. So I gave you a lot of science and scientific and medical terms. This is what I want you to take away, is that trauma may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility to heal from trauma, because if you don't heal from trauma, we will continue to bleed on people that didn't cut us. I hope you heard me today, is that if we don't heal from our traumas, we will continue to bleed on others. The fact of the matter is, another book I've written, it's on Amazon, it's called Hurting People Hurt People. Stop bleeding on people that didn't cut you is the book. And in that book talks about that when we don't identify with our traumas, when we are not honest about the hurts and the pain and the brokenness that's been in our lives, we continue to hemorrhage on other people. We continue to impact other people because hurting people hurt people. This is why I believe we are in a public health emergency, because of the traumas, our communities are hurting people. Hurting people hurt other people. Dr. Hope, why do we have all of this violence? Why do we have gang violence? Because hurting people hurt people. Those communities have been so traumatized, not just acute trauma or chronic trauma, but generational trauma. For generations, these same traumas and behaviors have been repeating itself, and many communities have been negatively impacted by the pain and brokenness of trauma. But I got good news for you today. And the good news is you can heal from your traumas. There's something called neuroplasticity, where the brain can be rewired and learn new habits and learn a new way of change. And when that happens, that can help individuals to begin to heal from their trauma. So there's hope. There's hope today. And I want you to be encouraged that now it is time for us to shift from trauma-informed to trauma-resilience. Trauma-informed is good if you have never been trained in trauma. No one have ever told you about the neuroscience of trauma, the neurobiological impacts of trauma. I get it. But my friends, if you are a professional, you're an educator, you're a teacher, you're a counselor, you're a social worker, you're a first responder, we got to do more. And that more is it's time for us to shift from trauma-informed to trauma resilience. And that resiliency is helping people when they heal, they shift from just surviving from their trauma to actually they're thriving over their trauma. So, my friend, I'm excited about this show. I know that no matter what has happened to you, you can heal. So many of us are like the Timex watch. We know how to take some lickings and keep on ticking. And that's many of you today. Many of you are stronger than what you give yourself credit for. I know you've had some trouble in your life. I know you may have suffered from abuse. You've suffered from neglect. You suffer from being abandoned. You suffer from a bad divorce, or you suffer from a bad breakup, or you suffered from all kind of different issues in your early childhood. But let me tell you what Frederick Douglass said. He said, it is far easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Wow. It is far easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. In other words, the quicker and the sooner that we can help young people at their younger ages during key times of brain development, is the time is best to bring healing from their traumas, so their adulthood and their future will be brighter. So as I close today, I want to take away is that you're stronger than what you give yourself credit for. And it's okay not to be okay. I don't know who I'm talking to who need to hear this today, but I want you to know that you are stronger than what you give yourself credit for. It's okay not to be okay. You can heal when you realize that it's important to get help. So let me give you a rundown on getting help. Number one, you need to come out of denial. You cannot continue to keep saying I'm okay, and you have all of these symptoms. You are depressed, you're showing levels of sadness, and sometimes even signs of suicide ideation. You are not okay. But this is the good news. You got to come out of denial. Two, you got to learn how to acknowledge where you are in life. You got to stop perpetrating like you don't need any help. Everyone needs some help, and everyone gets to a point in their life when they are not okay and they need to reach their arm up for somebody to pull them out. Three, you need to get a qualified professional. You need to get you a qualified professional. You need to get you a doctor. And sometimes I realize is that many people have a lot of issues because of the fact they're over 40 and their testosterone is low. And they're wondering why they're half crazy. Well, the data shows, especially for men that are past 30 and 40 and yes, 50, you don't produce as much testosterone. And if your testosterone is low, then you're going to be emotionally dysregulated and very moody and not that great to be around. And sometimes people are going through some things that they don't have to go through if they just went to their doctor, if they got a health screen to do their labs, do their blood work to make sure that they are okay. Then I would say after your doctor, find you a therapist. Get someone that can work on your mind. I find it's amazing how we have to remove still the stigma from mental illness. A lot of times people still don't feel comfortable seeing a mental illness. And I would say if you're not ashamed of having a dentist to work on your teeth and a cardiologist to work on your heart, you should not be ashamed to have a therapist or a psychologist to work on your mind. The fact of the matter is one of the other books I read written that's on Amazon today is that get your mind right. You cannot change your life until you first heal your brain. Heal the brain, and then your life is going to follow. So do those things, and then the next thing I would say is that it's important for you to also get a support network. So even though you may have a doctor, even though you may have a therapist, you need a support network. You need some good friends that can be that brings positive energy and a positive circle that keep you inspired and keep you motivated, that checks on you. A supportive network, man, you might need to look into make an appointment with your pastor, having a spiritual leader, a spiritual advisor, or some priest or some rabbi that gives you a support network. All of these things are going to be very important in helping you get yourself together. Setting healthy boundaries, which means that you got to remove the toxicity. You got to remove the abusive behavior and the narcissistic behaviors that sometimes perpetrators bring into your life to continue to keep you hyper aroused with your traumas. And then finally, no matter out of all the stuff I just said, no matter what all the stuff Dr. Holt just said, you must put in that work. You, not just everybody else. We cannot want it more than you want for yourself. And we want you to get healed because you have purpose in your life. And it takes a functional, healthy brain in order for you to fulfill your purpose and to fulfill your destiny and to fulfill your God-given potential. So Dr. Holt is letting you know that if you continue to put in that work and do those things, there's no secret of what your future can look like. So pick your head up, believe in yourself, and keep the faith and keep fighting. You're going to have some good days where it's going to feel like everything is good, and then you're going to get triggered and get aroused, hyper aroused, and you're going to have a few bad days. But if you continue to keep putting in that work, I guarantee you your future is going to be bright. So I close on this first episode on the Unbreakable Show, encouraging you that trauma may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility to heal. And it's time for you to start healing right now, and let us all come together and let's heal together. This is your boy, Dr. Holt, the trauma doctor. The trauma doctor is in the house, and I have approved this message.